Welcome to the inaugural episode of I Call BS. Today's subject is housing and Trudeau's latest excuse for doubling your rent and mortgage payments. You'll never believe who he's blaming this time. But before I break it to you, it's not a surprise Trudeau is grasping to blame anyone and everyone. After all, since he promised affordable homes, Canada's housing costs have doubled. They've outpaced incomes faster in Canada than in any other G7 country, now costing 25 to 45% more than south of the border. Demographia says that Vancouver is the third most overpriced housing market in the world, and you can now buy a 20-bedroom castle in Scotland for less than a 2-bedroom in Kitchener. So blame anyone and everyone to get the heat off Trudeau, right? But you'll never believe who he's blamed this time. Not Stephen Harper, but Jean Chrétien. Yes, that Jean Chrétien, the former Liberal Prime Minister. Here's what Trudeau's housing minister said.
And I should, to be fair, point to the cuts that were made in the early 90s under a Liberal government that actually discontinued investment in affordable housing for low-income Canadians.
Now, it is true that in 1995, the Liberal government of Jean Chrétien canceled a lot of housing programs to save money and fight the debt crisis left behind by Pierre Trudeau. So can we blame the Chrétien government from the mid-90s for doubling housing costs over the last 8 years? Well, let's check out the data. Here's the RBC Housing Affordability Chart, which measures home ownership costs as a percentage of median household income. Simply put, it's the share of the average family's pre-tax paycheck needed to make monthly payments on the average home. If indeed Jean Chrétien's cuts to these federal housing programs really are to blame for today's problems, you'd expect the graph to look like this, with a sudden rise in housing costs right when the cuts took place, or at least like this, with a gradual worsening of affordability starting right after the cuts. But the graph shows no such thing. Here's what the graph actually looks like. Instead, housing affordability actually improved after Chrétien's spending cuts and then remained stable for 13 years before a brief jump towards the beginning of the U.S. housing crisis. And then again, housing costs moderated back to their long-term average by 2015, a full 20 years after Chrétien canceled these programs. Now, here in the chart, you see the time when I was housing minister, when it took about 38% of the average family's paycheck to make payments on the average home. Now enter Justin Trudeau.
We need real change in affordable housing.
He promised to bring back the federal housing programs that Jean Chrétien had canceled.
The federal government is not only back in housing, but we're here to stay.
And he did. The Trudeau government brought back in $89 billion of so-called affordable housing programs in Ottawa. Now, you'd expect if these programs were effective that there would be a drop in housing costs after the spending began. So what are the results of all this spending? Well, housing costs shot up. In fact, they've become less affordable than in the entire recorded history of the Royal Bank's measure. Never before has the average Canadian family had to spend 62% of their monthly pre-tax income just to make monthly payments on the average home. And that's why, after 8 years of Trudeau, roughly 26% of Canadians are the only ones who can afford a single-family home. So when Trudeau ministers blame a decision from 30 years ago for a problem that only began in 2015, I call BS. Now, this is important, because if we accept the falsehood that ending federal housing programs caused the problem, we might be tricked into thinking that bringing them back is the solution. It is not, as proven by the fact that housing affordability improved when the programs were eliminated and worsened at the fastest pace ever when the Trudeau government brought them back. Why? Because these programs build bureaucracy and not homes. So now you must pay more to buy or rent, and you must pay more on your taxes for housing programs that only make the problem worse. It's bad to fail. It's even worse to fail expensively. You see, we don't need scapegoats or excuses. or more government programs. We need my common sense plan that builds homes, not bureaucracy. It requires municipalities permit 15% more homes per year as a condition of getting federal money. It sells off 6,000 federal buildings for housing and speeds up CMHC's approval of housing finance to 2 months and not 2 years. More homes, less bureaucracy. More common sense, less BS. Let's bring it home.